Ancient Rome. When we think of it, we picture glorious legions, shining armor, and triumphant parades through the heart of the city. We see images of military might, unbreakable discipline, and a civilization that conquered the known world. Roman victories were legendary, celebrated with massive ceremonies, roaring crowds, and golden statues erected to honor their generals. The Roman Empire projected an image of invincible power, and they wanted the entire world to witness it. But behind all this pomp and circumstance, behind the cheers and the shimmering gold, lies a much darker, often unspoken truth. What really happened after the trumpets fell silent and the crowds went home? The reality of Roman conquest was brutal, far from the sanitized version we often see in movies. A Roman triumph wasn't just a parade. It was a display of dominance. Captured enemy leaders, kings, and queens were often paraded through the streets in chains, humiliated before being publicly executed. This was a stark warning to anyone who dared to defy Rome. The message was clear. Resistance would be met not just with defeat, but with total degradation. And what about the ordinary soldiers on the losing side? Their fate was rarely merciful. After a battle, the Roman legions didn't just pack up and leave. They were masters of systematic slaughter. Historical accounts, including those from Roman writers themselves, describe scenes of unimaginable carnage. Entire populations of conquered towns were sometimes put to the sword. It wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about erasing the enemy's ability to ever fight back again. This policy of terror was a deliberate military strategy designed to break the will of their opponents and ensure long-term stability through fear. Then there was the fate of the survivors, the civilians who were unlucky enough to be in the path of the Roman war machine. For them, defeat often meant slavery. Millions of people from Gaul, Dacia, Judea, and countless other regions were captured and sold. They were ripped from their homes, separated from their families, and forced into a life of hard labor. They built Rome's magnificent monuments, worked its mines, and served in the households of the wealthy. The very foundation of the Roman economy and its lavish lifestyle was built on the backs of those they had conquered. The glory of the empire was fueled by the suffering of millions. Even Roman soldiers, the heroes of the empire, faced their own hardships. While generals and officers might get rich from the spoils of war, the life of a common legionary was incredibly tough. They endured grueling marshes, brutal discipline, and the constant threat of death. Many served for 20 years or more, far from home. If they survived, their retirement wasn't always guaranteed. Land grants could be delayed or denied, and many veterans struggled to reintegrate into a society they had left behind decades earlier. Their sacrifice was immense, but their reward was often uncertain. So, the next time you see a depiction of a glorious Roman victory, remember the hidden cost? The cheers of the crowd in Rome echoed against the cries of the vanquished. The gold that decorated their temples was often plundered treasure, and the stones of their famous buildings were cemented with the sweat and tears of slaves. The story of Rome is not just one of military genius and architectural wonder. It's also a story of brutal conquest, systematic oppression, and immense human suffering. Understanding this darker side doesn't diminish Rome's historical importance, but it gives us a more complete and honest picture of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. Imagine the scene. Ancient Rome, the heart of an empire. The streets are packed, the air electric with excitement. A Roman triumph is underway, the grandest spectacle the city will ever witness. It's a day of celebration, a massive, citywide parade to honor a victorious general and his legions. For the general, it is the peak of his career, the highest honor a man could achieve. For his soldiers, it's a moment of immense pride, marching through the cheering crowds, displaying the spoils of war. Gold, silver, exotic animals, and priceless artifacts are paraded through the streets, tangible proof of Rome's might. But amidst the roaring cheers and dazzling displays of wealth, there's a darker side to this celebration, a grim, human centerpiece to the spectacle. Following the victorious general's chariot are the defeated, captured kings, proud chieftains, and their families, forced to walk in chains. They are the living trophies of war, their humiliation a stark message to the world. This is what happens when you defy Rome. And for the captured queens and royal women among them, this public shaming was the final, devastating act and a tragedy that began the moment Roman legions crossed their borders. Who were these women? They were not just anonymous captives, they were rulers, regents, and princesses from powerful kingdoms that dared to stand against the rising tide of Roman expansion. They came from every corner of the known world. The fierce tribes of Gaul, the ancient and wealthy kingdom of Egypt, the warrior societies of Thrace, the desert realms of Numidia, and the opulent empires of the East. These were women of immense power and influence. They commanded armies, negotiated treaties, and were revered, sometimes even worshipped, by their people. They were symbols of their nation's sovereignty and strength. But to Rome, they were symbols of a different kind. They were symbols that needed to be broken. Their capture wasn't just a military objective. It was a psychological one. By parading a captured queen through their capital, the Romans weren't just showing off a prisoner. They were demonstrating their ability to shatter an entire culture, to topple a dynasty, and to erase a nation's identity. The fall of a queen signified the fall of her people. The journey from a throne to the dusty streets of Rome was a brutal one. Unspeakable. These royal women were stripped of their titles, their dignity, and their freedom. They were treated as valuable political assets, their fate decided by the whims of Roman generals and politicians. Some were held for years, their presence a constant reminder of Rome's long reach. Their children were often taken as well, raised in Rome to ensure the loyalty of their defeated homelands, or to be assimilated into Roman culture, severing their ties to their heritage. The triumph itself was the ultimate degradation. Dressed in their native finery, now a costume for Roman amusement, they were forced to walk 4 miles under the gaze of a hostile crowd. The very people who once bowed before them were now replaced by Romans who jeered, mocked, and celebrated their downfall. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare. Imagine the strength it must have taken to endure such a moment, to walk with any semblance of dignity while your entire world lay in ruins. Let's talk about some of these queens. Perhaps the most famous is Cleopatra of Egypt. Though she famously took her own life to avoid being paraded in Octavian's triumph, her story highlights the terror of this fate. Octavian, later the Emperor Augustus, had specifically wanted to display her as the ultimate prize. He even had an effigy of her, likely depicting her death with the asp, carried in the parade in her place. Her children, however, were not spared. Her young twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra were forced to walk in their mother's intended triumph, symbols of Egypt's final submission to Rome. Then there was Zenobia, the warrior queen of the Palmyrene Empire in the East. In the 3rd century AD, she carved out a vast empire for herself, challenging Roman authority directly. For a time, she was one of the most powerful women in the world, but her ambition flew too close to the sun. Defeated by the Emperor Aurelian, she was brought back to Rome. Accounts differ, but the most dramatic tell of her being adorned with so much gold and jewels in Aurelian's triumph that she could barely walk, weighed down by the very symbols of her former wealth and power. Her fate afterward is debated. Some say she died shortly after, others that she was allowed to live out her life as a Roman noblewoman. But her public humiliation was complete. And what about the queens of less famous kingdoms? Women like Disnelda, a princess of a Germanic tribe, who was betrayed by her own father and handed over to the Roman general Germanicus. She was pregnant at the time of her capture and was paraded in Germanicus' triumph while carrying her infant son. Her son was raised in Italy and his ultimate fate is unknown, lost to history. Her story is a poignant reminder of the personal cost of empire, of families torn apart and futures destroyed for the sake of Roman glory. The impact of seeing a queen in chains cannot be overstated. For the Roman populace, it was the ultimate reality show, a thrilling confirmation of their own superiority. It reinforced the idea that their civilization was destined to rule, that their gods favored them above all others. It was propaganda at its most effective for the rest of the world, for the other kingdoms watching from the sidelines. The message was chillingly clear. Resist, and this could be your queen, your mother, your sister. This could be your fate. But it's important to remember the humanity behind the symbol. These were real women, thrust into unimaginable circumstances. They experienced fear, grief, and despair. They had to watch as their kingdoms were dismantled, their cultures suppressed, and their children taken from them. Some like Cleopatra, chose death over dishonor. Others, like Zenobia, endured, finding a way to survive in the heart of the empire that had destroyed them. Their stories, though often relegated to footnotes in the grand narrative of Roman history, are tales of incredible resilience. They force us to look beyond the triumphal arches and celebratory inscriptions and see the true cost of conquest. The Roman triumph wasn't just a parade. It was a funeral procession for conquered nations, and the captured queens were the chief mourners, forced to walk at the head of it. So, the next time you see a depiction of a Roman triumph in a movie or a painting, look past the gleaming armor and the cheering crowds. Look for the figures in chains, the ones with their heads held high in defiance or bowed in sorrow. They are the silent witnesses to the other side of victory. Their stories remind us that history is never just about the winners. It's also about those who lost, those who were broken, and those who were forced to become symbols of their own people's subjugation. The legacy of these captured queens is a powerful testament to the human cost of empire and the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be forgotten. Ever witnessed a Roman triumph in your mind? Picture this. Magnificent parades winding through the streets of Rome, celebrating a victorious general. The air is thick with cheers. The spoils of war are on full display, and a long, somber line of prisoners marches in chains. But among these captives, one figure would have drawn every single eye. A figure who was more than just a prisoner of war. She was a captured queen. To their romance, a queen wasn't just another high-ranking enemy. She was a living symbol. Think about it. A king or a general could be a formidable opponent, a tactical genius. But a queen, she was the heart of her nation, the embodiment of its culture, its spirit, and its pride. She represented a people's very identity. Capturing a king was a military victory. Capturing a queen was a psychological conquest. It was a statement that Rome hadn't just defeated an army, but had broken the will of an entire civilization. This is why their treatment was so profoundly different. While ordinary soldiers or even nobles might be sold into slavery or assimilated into Roman society, a captured queen was destined for a much more public and symbolic fate. Her journey as a captive was a carefully orchestrated piece of political theater. Take, for example, the legendary Zenobia, queen of the Palmyre Empire. She carved out a massive kingdom for herself, challenging Rome's dominance in the east. When Emperor Aurelian finally defeated her, he knew her capture was the real prize. Zenobia wasn't just thrown into a dungeon. She was brought to Rome to be the star attraction of his triumph. Accounts describe her being paraded through the city, weighed down not just by chains, but by immense quantities of gold and jewels, so heavy she could barely walk. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about spectacle. The message was clear. Look at this powerful queen who dared to defy Rome. See how she is now, a mere ornament in our celebration. It was a way of demonstrating Rome's absolute power to its own citizens and to the world. Breaking air publicly and humiliatingly was a way of breaking the spirit of any who might dream of resisting. But what happened after the parade? This is where it gets interesting, because the queen's fate wasn't always a death sentence. Unlike male enemy leaders, who were often ritually executed at the end of a triumph, queens were sometimes spared. Zenobia, for instance, after her public shaming, was reportedly given a villa in Tivoli and lived out her days in a comfortable, if confined, retirement. Her children were even married into the Roman aristocracy. Why this apparent mercy? It was another calculated move. Killing a queen could make her a martyr, a symbol of resistance that could inspire future rebellions. A dead queen is a legend, but a queen living in quiet luxury in Italy, that's a different story. It sends a message of Roman magnanimity, a sword to submit to us, and you too can enjoy the fruits of our civilization. It turned a symbol of defiance into a symbol of Roman clemency and assimilation. It was the final act of psychological warfare, turning the enemy's heart into a Roman trophy. The story of Cleopatra is another powerful, though different, example. After her defeat, alongside Mark Antony, she knew what awaited her in Rome. She understood the Roman playbook. She knew Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, would want to parade her through the streets, just as Zenobia would be paraded later. Her famous suicide was not an act of despair. but a final act of defiance. She chose her own end, on her own terms, denying Octavian his ultimate prize. She refused to become a spectacle in his triumph, preserving her dignity and her status as Queen of Egypt. Even in death, by taking her own life, she won her final battle against Rome, ensuring she would be remembered as a formidable ruler, not a broken captive. So, when we look back at the Roman Empire, the treatment of captured queens offers a fascinating window into their psychology of power. It wasn't just about military might, it was about controlling the narrative, about dominating the hearts and minds of both their subjects and their enemies. A queen was the ultimate symbol, and how the Romans chose to display, break, or preserve that symbol tells us everything we need to know about the ruthless and sophisticated nature of their empire. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from history. See you next time.